Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the fourth and final end of year list, one of the most painful ones to do, the 10 worst rap albums of 2022. And then when this is all done, it can officially become 2023. As I covered in the last video, 2022 had some amazing albums throughout it, but it also had some stinkers too, some nasty albums. Although in general, I love the albums on my 10 best albums of the year list more than I dislike the albums on this 10 worst albums of the year list, so I guess that's kind of a good sign for the year for me. So let's not waste any more time, and let's get right into it.
The drink gon' make me think. The drink gon' give me faith. I'm rich and yeah, I'm major. Won't let the money make me.
For an album that's called Trendsetter, this album really seems to follow trends more than anything. It's an album that feels like Koi's label made her try every hit song style of sound that exists within rap music to try and maximize the performance of the album, but the inconsistency in the sound is one of the main things that holds it back. Like something like Hollywood Dreams into Blick Blick, then into I, then into Mountains. It all flows together super weird. It kind of reminds me, oddly enough, of DJ Khaled albums. That definitely isn't foreshadowing for later on in this list, and the overstuffed feature list gives it that vibe as well. It's ranked as the least worst one on this list because it does actually have a few moments where Koi makes these sounds work. For example, the really sort of like positive, upbeat sound of something like Twin I think really works for the kind of personality that Koi seems to have with her really just bright, upbeat personality. And Thief in the Night admittedly goes hard and has a really catchy hook. But for every good track, there's at least 4 that miss because Koi is trying to do so many different styles across this album. Some of the most disastrous results were Clingy with Nav, her verse on Mountains, which was a really forced drill song and it feels like her flow just doesn't match up with the beat whatsoever, and Heartbreak Kid, which goes for a weird melodic version of the Playboi Carti baby voice.
It's crazy cause I know you feel it. The rollie gon' bust but the grind got no time limit. Bitch, get money, my sleep is easy. Bitch, instead of most these bitches. I don't chase niggas, SBs ain't got no CC.
Personally, I do still think Koi is overhated overall as an artist because I think there's a lot of people who wouldn't even acknowledge the good parts of this album because I think they do exist. But I can also think that while thinking that this project isn't the best showcase of her music because there's a lot of bad mixed in with the very few good parts.
You go BBS, no like money Mitch. Our stands for really rich, I'm in that color name.
Well, I did get one enjoyable album out of Gunna with Wanna, but that improvement did not continue on Drip Season forever. The biggest problem with this project for me is just that it really overstays its welcome for what it is. Once you get past Too Easy, it just slows down to a crawl. Make no mistake, there are bad songs before that point, with songs like Poochie Gown and Thought I Was Playing going for that darker tone instrumentally, which I personally think mixes really terribly with Gunna's extremely light vocal presence.
I took a little last night here for the win. Niggas don't want me to win. I bought a new car for my twin. This shit ain't just for the trend.
But I can barely remember anything about tracks 14 to 20. Or 14 to 19. 20 is just a remix of Too Easy. 14 to 19. I mean, I'm looking at the track list right now, and it's really hard to recall how they each sound, but all I remember is boring, terrible, boring again, garbage, bad, decent but too exhausted to care by this point, and good remix of one of the album's few good songs. I'll have to wait for his next album to know for sure, but maybe Wanna was just a fluke. We're gonna manage to do everything just that little bit better. Because Drip Season 4 is a step backwards from the quality production, improved flows, and stronger overall performances by Gunna on that album.
Before a nigga came up, they was waiting on baby to blow.
What happened to DaBaby, man? Even his previous Blame It On Baby album, which everyone seemingly hated, I didn't think it was that bad. But I am in agreement with the general sentiment that I've seen on Baby 2. of it being a terrible album. DaBaby, you can't say something like "Thought Baby fell off, bitch, I'm flipping the script" on the first track of an album that was so weak and had so little hype around it that it sold 107,000 less copies than your previous album. Sales don't equal quality, but sometimes they can be a fairly good indication. That's why lyrics like his one on Boogeyman about having sex with Megan Thee Stallion just stink of desperation to be relevant again. Did you see anyone talk about anything when this album came out other than how bad it was or that line? Because that's all I saw. And that's all there really is of note here. I'd imagine it wasn't received so well because the sound of almost every song is about as ugly as that monster looking thing on the cover.
What the fuck?
It's annoying because DaBaby can rap and he sounds good when he's given high level production, but he gets absolutely none of that on here. And picks beats that sound like they were produced with a toddler's toy instruments, and sometimes he just decides to do awful singing over these beats for seemingly no reason.
That's how I know me and them not the same. I go to hell, go to jail by my gang. I go to hell, go to jail by my gang. Yeah!
There's just nothing on here that's catchy enough to warrant any replays, really. It's a rough feeling when I'm in the middle of a 31-minute long album and it already feels like it's been going on for too long. 2019 was DaBaby's peak in terms of music, and it seems like it's gonna be staying that way.
Be perky, they don't stop. I can't feel enough here. I was pulling up and they did by the belly truck.
If you watch my worst rappers in the game video on Yeet, then this won't be a particularly surprising pick to you because I said in that video that this was my least favorite album of his that I've heard so far. And it's still remained that way. While I can definitely appreciate Yeet's unique style, and I definitely think he has the potential to make some great music eventually, Too Alive is his sound at its most abrasive and off-putting. The first 3 tracks are actually fairly enjoyable. Poppin' in particular has grown on me quite a bit, but once you reach Never Again, the album just quickly declines from there. That song goes too far in the overly abrasive direction, and it's just too much to sound good to me. And after that point, you get a lot of tracks like that, and less that actually bump. The biggest problem in general is probably that Yeet is best for me in small doses, and when he's not going too over the top. I can hear a few tracks and enjoy his music, but anything more than that and it kinda gets annoying to me. So until he makes albums that flow together a little bit better from track to track, then I'm gonna keep on being a little bit sick of them by the end of the track list.
It's a reason all this shit be going how it does. I ain't trying to hear about the past and what it was.
You probably knew this album was gonna be here if you heard me talk about it at all in 2022. This is the epitome of swagless, unseasoned music. It's when your idea of being suave and sexy comes across as bland and humorless. This music sounds like eating cooked chicken breast with nothing at all added to it tastes. Not even a little dash of peri-peri or some Cajun seasoning to add some kick to it. It's a shame though, because I don't hate Jack Harlow's music overall, but this album is like he took his earlier music and persona and somehow whitewashed it, with flashes of personality only ever really coming through on Like a Blade of Grass, and I mean, that's about it. By the way, Movie Star? What the fuck? That song absolutely would have been on my 10 worst hit songs of the year list if it charted, because that Pharrell production and his hook, mixed with Jack's lifeless verses on here, it is a horrible combo.
I'm with a movie star, oof, young Angelina. And I know they say all type of things. You got it done just in time for the video, right? You got some pretty toes. Yeah.
The more I listen to Come Home the Kids Miss You, the more that I feel like the production across the project isn't actually all that terrible, but Jack just isn't the right rapper for these beats. Just give these beats to someone who's actually smoother, because this album is about as exciting as the cover suggests that it would be. Just Jack sitting there in a blank, white, lifeless box with a microphone. I'm assuming that was the environment that this project was recorded in.
This a wide body, these ain't socks though. He ain't body, where your chop go?
DJ Khaled albums be like, here's your one song of the year contender in between a sea of stinky ass. If you've watched my 10 best rap songs of the year list, then you'll know that I think the title track from this album is absolutely insane. But then there just isn't a single other track that even comes close to matching it across this runtime. Almost every song here screams leftover track from artists that are usually better than this. It's amazing how you can have a track list stacked with talented mainstream features all throughout, and have it produce so much mid back to back. The 47-second long intro from Drake really gives you a good indication of what to expect throughout the rest of the album. Extremely popular artists phoning it in for their yearly favor to Big Man Khaled.
They act like we friends, whole time is pretense, so whole time on defense.
It's really just a collection of every current trendy sound in hip-hop, but without an inkling of the passion or excitement that made those sounds trendy in the first place. That's pretty much the best summary I can give of it. It's just pure disappointment considering how many of the artists on this project I really enjoy overall.
Your favorite rapper act like a weirdo. Every time I talk, you keep on blinking at me. Eliante on my bracelet, 2-carat eyeballs.
I saw people hyping up this album as a good, or even in some cases great album before I'd even heard it, with people on Twitter saying stuff like, man, I wasn't a Nav fan before, I don't really like his music, but this new album was solid. And I've got to ask, what were you smoking? I was disappointed to find, as someone that listens to Nav as a guilty pleasure type of artist, that this was worse than his last two projects, and one of my least favourites that he's ever dropped. It's fighting for the bottom spot in his discography with Bad Habits. I was genuinely confused trying to figure out what made this album different for people to enjoy it more that don't typically enjoy Nav. I don't get it. The lyrics, for example, are pretty much the same stuff that Nav has always talked about in his music. He's always had depressing lyrics that he delivers with the emotion of an AI-generated voice. The production style is maybe a little bit different at points, with it feeling a little bit more internet money style of production than the usual more low-key Nav production, if that makes sense. But in my opinion, it's really mixed up in a way that makes this album feel less cohesive than most other Nav projects, weirdly enough. And it has stuff like Demons in My Cup and Weirdo, which are up there with Coast to Coast when it comes to most awful sounding Nav tracks.
Fuck the bitch off the Henny and pulled out. My girl in the place, I put my foot down. With no seasoning, beef getting cooked now. Try to play with us, he getting put down.
Really though, the biggest crime committed by this album is just that it's extremely boring and forgettable. Even Nav's most boring album before this point, Bad Habits, has more tracks that I would come back to and revisit and remember how they sound, compared to this one where I only ever come back for Baby, Playa, and Interstellar. And one of those is pretty much just because of the feature. As Nav's most critical secret stan, this album was really disappointing.
Everybody can't put that fire.
You know, I'm really liking Lil Baby's awkward, goofy, Disney-fied persona when he's on TV and social media and stuff like that right now, because it's pretty entertaining and wholesome. But when it comes to the music, man, this album was a sharp drop-off from My Turn, which in my opinion in itself was just a decent album and not that great. This album sounds like music from an artist that blew up extremely fast and doesn't need to try as much anymore. Because almost nothing about this project hits. It's Lil Baby on 50% of the 65% of energy that he usually runs on. It's hard for me to even really provide a summary of the album because there is so little of note for me on here. Boring beats, low energy from Baby, flows that sometimes struggle to keep up with the drum beat, and there isn't even any memorable bangers on here. It's not a good sign when it takes 9 tracks to reach the first song on the project that actually bumps. That's all I can say about it. It's just a flat out bad album.
No, you tell me that real little boy, I see your chains they tarnish. Flexing me on my plate when I eat my business, shit got garnished.
It's gotten worse, boys. Kid Buu has listened to Yeet. It has been a while since I've talked about the man that can sound like a clone of other popular mainstream rappers and add absolutely nothing new to the table while doing it, but I decided to check out his latest album just to see if it would fit in with this video. And oh boy, it does. As I said at the start, Yeet seems to be another artist that's been added to Kid Buu's repertoire of artists that I will completely copy, but do their sound much worse, which can be seen on the songs Met Gala and No Feels.
When I step out, it look like it's fashion week. Love to show out, bitch, I'm such a fashion beast. I'm out here trying to make my mama proud of me. I'm making all of that money monopoly. No, I'm not friendly, cause that's how I gotta be. I don't be proud of it, you to be proud of it.
Throughout the rest of the project, it's your usual suspects, with Kid Buu, for a big part of this album, doing his best Lil Uzi Vert impression, mixed in with a little bit of Carti, plus some awful 6ix9ine autotune style singing, and an album title that seems all too inspired by Trippie Redd's early mixtape titles. I wrote in my notes on this album that Buckle Up is basically an actual Lil Uzi song. It's not even funny.
She telling me, baby, I wanna be yours. Damn. Sorry, little baby, I'm changing my hoes to black clothes. Yeah.
It's been years since I last covered Kid Buu, and sadly, originality has not even accidentally stumbled into his music yet. Also, I've got to mention the song Red Diamond real quick. The beat for that song is like listening to an alien robot with digestive issues. Some of you guys are going to say that that sounded hard, but you're lying to yourselves, and you're not going to make it throughout the full 2-minute song. Just some of the worst music that you're going to hear from 2022 if you decide to check it out. And it doesn't even have the courtesy to be bad in an original way. He even released a reversed version of the album, where every song plays in, well, in reverse. That's pretty terrible too. You're probably wondering, what can be worse than this? Well, I don't think you're going to be particularly surprised when you find out. Right now.
Racism is gay if you're offended, that's retarded. And tolerance is great until you speak and you're a target.
Could it really have been anything else? Like a painfully ironic twist of fate, after I made my White Boy trilogy, where I made 2 videos on Tom MacDonald and 1 video on Adam Calhoun, it was announced that they'd be doing a collab album together. The first track on it is even called White Boys. Tom, Adam, if you wanted to take some inspiration from my YouTube videos, all you had to do was ask me. Now let's take a second here. I want you guys to really think about this. I made a 40-minute plus long video on Tom MacDonald's Ghost Stories album. I made a 1 hour long plus video on Tom MacDonald's Gravestones album. I made a roughly 10-minute video on Adam Calhoun's music. That's all I really felt like doing. Despite all of that, despite the amount of time that I've put into listening to their music and making videos about them before, I could not bring myself to make a single video on this album because it's so fucking boring. Not even a quick 2-3 minute review. This is the 2 to 3 minute review because I just couldn't bring myself to talk about it anywhere else. Even talking about it feels like it's draining my life force. This album is a succubus, but nowhere near as sexy. Even Tom MacDonald albums are fun to laugh at, but this album didn't even reach that astoundingly high bar of quality. Cop Puncher Adam Calhoun is definitely the weak point for the entire album. He's so damn bland. Every verse is so slow, deliberate, and stiff that it's devoid of any personality. He makes Tom MacDonald seem like a charisma factory. The most notable thing with Adam on this album is that some of his wordplay is so corny, and you just can't help but notice it with his slow, plodding delivery. Playing 50 Cent and I don't even like coins. Quit asking for a feature, I don't care you got your cheese up, unless we talking pizza. These are the bars that got you out the hood, Adam? Tom definitely showcases more dynamic vocals and a little bit more personality than Adam does, but that doesn't count for much because even Tom is somehow less interesting on this project. It's like he made himself blander so the gap between him and Adam wasn't that big. Tom doesn't really have the wacky, stupid concepts on this album that he usually does on his own ones, so this project is completely lacking that color, and this feels weird to say about a Tom MacDonald album, but the life that you can kind of find on some Tom MacDonald albums. The cover really represents the project. It's just so grey and bland and boring and kind of serious, but still hard to take serious because it's these goobers. But hey, there is an audience for this album. For example, if you watch The Boys and you say to yourself while you're watching it, this Homelander guy, he is a real American hero, then you're gonna love this album.
Every year there's a new name for enemies that we're facing. It's Al-Qaeda, then ISIS, and now American patriots. Make America China pretty easy to see. I will always remember the land of the free.
It's the worst album I heard in 2022, but at least I didn't have to buy this one to hear it. The physical copy of it is about 19 songs long. I believe it has the track White Boys 2 on there, which, I don't know how they're going to top the first one, but the version on streaming is around 14 songs long, but I definitely heard what I needed to from that, and thank God I didn't have to shell out any money on this painfully boring album. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the end of year lists for 2022. We're officially moving into 2023 on this channel now. Yay! Thank you for sticking with me throughout these lists, and of course, let me know down in the comments below what was the worst album of 2022 for you. And you can click right there on the screen to see what I thought were the best ones of the year if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and patiently waiting for these videos, and thank you to my Patreon supporters as well. With a special shout out to my biggest supporters, and those are Agir, Big Daddy Foe, Griffin Upchurch, Diego Victoriano, I Am Regent, Josh Gourmet, Lucas1123, and Ryan Shadow 507.